Can parents go to the heights of abducting their own children? Well, to keep them close, they might. In this video, we look deeply into the case of Paislee Shultis, a 4-year-old girl from upstate New York who was reported missing in July 2019, and to the detective's shock, was finally found nearly 3 years later hidden inside a secret staircase compartment. Paislee Shultis, the younger biological daughter of Kimberly Cooper and Kirk Shultis Jr., disappeared on July 13, 2019 from Tioga County, New York. She was raised in the quiet village of Cayuga Heights on the outskirts of Ithaca. Paislee had a fairly normal childhood of 4 years until her parents lost custody of their 2 daughters in a custodial conflict with her legal guardian. Paislee's maternal grandmother. The grandmother raised concerns about the children's late-night schedule. She claimed that Cooper and Shultis Jr. would take their kids to their jobs at construction sites until close to midnight because the parents could not afford daycare. While seeking custody of the children, the grandmother in her argument also cited alleged drug use by the biological parents. Paislee's father had a criminal history of arrests in 2019 after prosecutors accused him of possession of methamphetamine and heroin. For that case, he pleaded out to a lesser charge of drug paraphernalia and spent 8 days in jail. He had also faced charges of home improvement fraud in Pennsylvania and pleaded guilty to it. These charges made him serve another 2 months in jail. As the biological parents had a strong motive to secretly abduct their child, Cooper and Shultis Jr. became immediate suspects in the kidnapping. The authorities believed that as soon as somebody had informed the parents that the older child had been picked up by the legal guardian and county officials, both of them took Paislee and fled. The agents' belief was even more strengthened as they started receiving numerous tips about the parents' Socrates home. Now the police just had to launch an intensive search operation into their Socrates home, but legally, that wasn't going to be so easy. The police started the search by paying dozens of visits to the parents' Socrates home, but since they lacked the evidence for a search warrant, they only had limited access to the bedrooms in the basement, and none of those visits could provide them with evidence strong enough to track Paislee. During the search visits, Cooper and Shultis Jr. didn't cooperate with the investigative agencies at all. Instead, the couple claimed of being harassed and badgered by the detectives. Her father kept saying that he had no idea where his daughter was, and that instead of looking into her parents' home, the police should focus on finding Paislee. This non-cooperative and suspicious behavior of Paislee's parents made the authorities believe more strongly towards the couple's guilt, which ultimately confirmed that their hunt was going in the right direction. But all the information they had until then was hearsay, and due to the lack of a search warrant, the authorities could not search any further. The suspects in the kidnapping were trying to play a clever game of warrants, legal obligations, and civil rights. And it was working. Nearly 3 years after Paislee went missing with no further leads for obtaining a search warrant, the tables turned. The authorities this time received an unspecified tip that contained factual evidence that the girl was hidden in her parents' Socrates home. With this information, the Socrates police were able to grab a search warrant for the residence. To execute the warrant, officers arrived at the residence at 4 p.m. and made sure that nobody left the property. Kimberly Cooper, Shultis Sr. and Shultis Jr. had to stay inside the house until the search was over. The officers asked them, "Is she here?" To which they refused as always. Although they had searched the property numerous times before, this time they had access to every corner of the house and they wanted to dig into each one of them. Officers discovered a room in the basement for the first time. It held a bed that appeared to have been slept in, and Paislee's name was written on one of the walls, to which the homeowners claimed that they merely had the room ready in case she was ever found. Around 9 p.m., Detective Eric Thiel spotted what looked like a blanket after pointing his flashlight through a crack in the wooden staircase. There was something about the staircase that bothered him, said one of Eric's colleagues. Thiel and his colleagues began pulling the steps apart and they saw what they had been looking for 3 years. It was 2 tiny feet of Paislee. After removing several more steps, they found out that she had lain in the compartment alongside Cooper in silence for over an hour. Then the detectives pulled out Paislee from the small, cold, and wet compartment. It was pretty dingy. It was cold. There were blankets that were laying on the ground with the concrete floor. They were completely soaked, extremely heavy, stated one of the detectives who had executed the search. Officers claimed that this makeshift hiding space was probably used every time authorities paid Shultis Jr., his father, and Cooper a visit. All 3 of them were immediately arrested and Paislee was sent for physical examination. While Cooper is said to face charges of custodial interference in the 2nd degree and endangering the welfare of a child, Shultis Jr. and his father face charges of the same crime in the 1st degree. The most recent reports on this case suggest that the parents and Paislee's paternal grandfather have pleaded not guilty in the courts. Paislee has been reported in good health and her non-custodial parents have been asked to stay distant from her. Alive and physically well, the girl was returned to her maternal grandmother, and those who saved her presented her with a McDonald's treat on the drive back to the police station. I understand as a parent, no one wants to lose custody of their children, but sometimes the right for us to do for our children is the hardest thing to do for our children, quoted one of the detectives involved. In the culmination to this thrilling search for Paislee Shultis, while her culprits stand in the trial, the question here remains. What was Paislee told by her parents that would keep her so still and quiet while the cops are walking up and down the steps and while they're taking the steps apart? If you have a possible answer to this, let us know in the comments below. Also, if you like the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more such unbelievable cases.